Welcome back. We're here to continue our journey through the Middle Ages, exploring incredible curiosities that shape the life and culture of this fascinating period. Have you ever wondered how medieval bankers worked or how fishermen ensured their catch? Get ready for more captivating stories, and don't forget to leave your super like before embarking on this adventure. Number 1. Minstrels and Troubadours. The art and music of the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, music and poetry were essential parts of daily life, and minstrels and troubadours played a crucial role. They not only entertained kings and peasants, but also preserved stories, traditions, and emotions through their songs and performances. Let's dive into the fascinating world of these medieval artists. Who were the minstrels? Minstrels were traveling performers who moved from castle to castle and village to village to showcase their art. Their performances blended music, poetry, and theater, often accompanied by instruments such as lutes, harps, and flutes. Troubadours and their creations, troubadours, on the other hand, were more than just performers. They created their own songs and poems, often inspired by courtly love, the Crusades, or heroic legends. Their compositions could be profound and emotional, reflecting the complexities of medieval society. The difference between minstrels and troubadours. While both were artists, there were key differences between minstrels and troubadours. Minstrels were more associated with performing and reciting popular tales, while troubadours were original creators, often composing innovative songs and poems. While minstrels adapted known narratives, troubadours sought to eternalize their own stories. The cultural importance of traveling artists. These artists were fundamental in preserving history and culture. Their songs narrated great events such as battles and conquests, and celebrated the feats of legendary heroes. In a time when most of the population was illiterate, minstrels and troubadours acted as chroniclers of medieval society. Instruments and musical styles. Medieval music was characterized by unique instruments and a sound that combined simplicity and emotion. Lutes, flutes, and harps were the most popular instruments, and the musical style ranged from soft melodies to vibrant rhythms that enlivened feasts and celebrations. The popularity and prestige of artists. Minstrels were popular among both peasants and the aristocracy, but troubadours found greater prestige among the nobility. Their compositions were often commissioned by kings and nobles, granting them a special status. Retold stories and the oral tradition. Many of the medieval stories we know today, such as the legends of King Arthur, were preserved through the oral tradition carried on by these artists. Their narratives fed the imagination and kept the era's traditions alive. Extra insight. The decline of minstrels and troubadours. With the emergence of the printing press in the late Middle Ages, minstrels and troubadours began to lose prominence. Stories that once relied on oral transmission were now recorded in books, marking the beginning of a new era in cultural preservation. Minstrels and troubadours were not just entertainers. They were true guardians of medieval culture and history. Their music and stories inspired generations and continue to captivate us to this day. What's your favorite medieval story or legend? Share it in the comments. Number 2. Did medieval peasants know what year it was? Have you ever wondered how people in the Middle Ages perceived time? Did peasants know what year it was? Let's uncover how time was measured and experienced during this intriguing historical period. The importance of the agricultural cycle and religious calendar. For peasants, the year wasn't counted as we do today, with numbers. Instead, it was marked by agricultural cycles and religious celebrations. Planting, harvesting, and festivities like Christmas and Easter dictated the rhythm of their lives. Monks and nobles. The keepers of time. While most peasants were illiterate, monks and nobles kept records of time. They used systems like the Julian calendar, marking years based on the reigns of kings or important religious dates, such as the birth of Christ. The relativity of time in the Middle Ages. For peasants, knowing the exact year had little relevance. What truly mattered was the time of the season, when to plant, harvest, or rest. While the recording of years was important for the church and royalty, for the common folk, time was lived more practically and cyclically. How peasants measured time. Peasants measured time simply. The position of the sun, changes in the seasons, and church bells were their main markers. There were no clocks as we know them today, and precision was less important than following the natural rhythm of life. The religious influence on timekeeping religion played a central role in organizing time. Religious festivals, like St. John's Day, Christmas, and Easter, were primary references. The clergy also maintained the calendar, marking events based on the liturgical cycle. Why the year was less important, unlike today, knowing the exact year wasn't as crucial in the Middle Ages. Life was governed by seasons and survival, and time was perceived more as a cyclical continuity rather than a straight line advancing year by year. Curiosity, reigns, and records of important events, the few existing records of time, were often marked by the reigns of kings or popes. For example, significant events were dated as in the third year of such and such sovereign's reign. For the common people, these details held little relevance in their daily lives. The impact of illiteracy on time perception: most of the medieval population was illiterate, meaning written records didn't play a role in their lives. The notion of written time was something reserved for monasteries and royal courts. Even though peasants didn't know the exact year, it wasn't important to them. Time was measured by seasons, church bells, and the natural cycles of life. Today, it reminds us how our perception of time has evolved over the centuries. What did you think of this perspective on medieval time? Leave your comment. Number 3. What were relics? And did pilgrims pay to see sacred relics? In the Middle Ages, sacred relics inspired awe and were the destination of many pilgrimages. But what exactly were these relics, and did pilgrims have to pay to see them? Let's delve into this world filled with devotion, faith, and even a bit of controversy. What were relics? Relics were objects associated with saints or biblical events. They could include bones, teeth, pieces of clothing, fragments of the cross of Christ, and even supposed parts of Jesus' body. These items were considered sacred, carrying great spiritual and miraculous power for those who venerated them. The role of relics in medieval religious life: relics were not just religious objects. They represented a tangible connection between the sacred and the earthly. For many medieval Christians, venerating a relic could bring blessings, miraculous healings, and even forgiveness of sins. It's no wonder they were so highly valued and drew thousands of pilgrims every year. Pilgrimages, a journey of faith pilgrimage to see a relic, was a demonstration of faith and sacrifice. Routes such as the Way of St. James and the Road to Canterbury were among the most famous destinations. The journey was long and full of challenges, but the faithful believed the spiritual reward was worth every step. Were there costs to see relics? While there wasn't an official entry fee to view relics, pilgrims often made donations or offerings as an act of faith. These contributions helped maintain the churches and shrines that housed the sacred items. However, these offerings were seen as voluntary, a devotional gesture rather than a financial obligation. The spiritual power and credibility of relics: the spiritual power of a relic was directly tied to its authenticity. Bones of famous saints, such as St. Peter or St. James, were highly revered. However, not all relics were genuine, and there were reports of forgeries that deceived the faithful. Relics and medieval religious tourism. Relics also gave rise to what we might call religious tourism. Many shrines attracted pilgrims from afar, bringing not only devotion, but also economic opportunities for the towns that housed these sacred items. Relics as symbols of prestige and power. Relics were also symbols of prestige. Kings and nobles competed to acquire the rarest items, and owning an important relic could elevate the status of a church or monarch. Often, these relics were used to attract pilgrims and consolidate political and religious power. The controversy surrounding relics: despite their importance, relics weren't always universally accepted. Many debates arose over the authenticity of certain items, and there was criticism of the financial exploitation of pilgrimages. These controversies eventually influenced religious reforms in later centuries. Relics were much more than simple objects. They represented faith, hope, and even a connection to the divine. While there were controversies and challenges, there's no doubt they deeply shaped the spirituality and culture of the Middle Ages. If you could travel back in time, which relic would you like to see? Share your thoughts in the comments. Number 4. What were medieval bankers and lending like? In the Middle Ages, the concept of banking and lending was very different from what we know today. But how did medieval bankers handle money and loans? Let's dive into how commerce and religion shaped banking practices during this period. The role of bankers in the Middle Ages. Medieval bankers were essential to the growth of commerce. They facilitated transactions, exchanged currencies, and even provided loans. However, unlike modern banks, transactions were simple and often conducted on the spot, using coins or goods as currency. The challenge of usury. The Catholic ban. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages prohibited usury, the act of charging interest on loans. To the faithful, charging interest was considered a sin, as it went against the principles of charity and love for one's neighbor. This forced bankers to get creative in finding ways around this prohibition. Jewish bankers in the early Middle Ages. In the early Middle Ages, many bankers were Jewish because the church forbade Christians from engaging in usury. Jewish communities, on the other hand, were more flexible and could provide loans with interest. This gave Jewish bankers an important economic role in medieval towns. The three types of medieval bankers. Three main types of bankers emerged in the Middle Ages. 1. Merchant bankers worked with large businesses, kings, and governments, facilitating commercial transactions across different countries. 2. Money changers specialized in exchanging currencies from various regions, a vital service for international trade. 3. Deposit bankers offered services such as safeguarding money and precious goods in exchange for a small fee. The evolution of lending and the reassessment of usury as commerce expanded, particularly in the city-states of the Renaissance. The concept of loans and interest began to be re-evaluated. By the 14th century, the church allowed certain types of interest to be charged, as long as the rates were reasonable and not considered exploitative. Banking activity in Renaissance city-states. With the rise of commerce and the establishment of city-states, bankers began to expand their operations beyond local borders. They started financing trade expeditions, kingdoms, and even wars. This ushered in a new era of power for banking families, such as the Medici in Florence, who became influential in European politics and finance. The role of debt and payment records, debt collection, and loan repayments were meticulously recorded. Often, these debts were settled after a person's death, with families being required to repay what their loved ones owed. All records were handwritten, and the payment process was carefully monitored. The emergence of the modern banking system. These medieval banking practices laid the foundation for today's financial systems. Over the centuries, medieval bankers established the groundwork for accounting and credit exchange, which we now use in everyday life. Medieval bankers played a crucial role in the economic growth of the Middle Ages. Between church prohibitions and new commercial models, they managed to transform the medieval financial system and sow the seeds for the banking system we know today. What do you think about this evolution? Share your thoughts in the comments. Number 5. What were fishermen like in the Middle Ages? In the Middle Ages, fishing was one of the essential activities for sustaining communities. But what were medieval fishermen like? What tools did they use? And how did this practice fit into everyday medieval life? Let's find out. Fishing in the Middle Ages. A basic necessity, fishing in the Middle Ages was crucial for feeding populations. With limited transportation and food preservation methods, fish became an important source of protein, especially for those who couldn't raise livestock or grow large amounts of crops. Fishing tools. Medieval fishermen used a variety of tools to catch fish. Fishing rods with simple lines and hooks were common, but nets were even more effective. Nets were used in large bodies of water, such as rivers and seas, to catch significant amounts of fish at once. River and lake fishing versus sea fishing. Fishing in freshwater, like rivers and lakes, was a vital activity for peasants and people living in remote areas. Meanwhile, sea fishing, practiced in coastal regions, was more complex, requiring larger boats and specialized equipment. This distinction between freshwater and saltwater fishing also reflected the differences in local economies. Fishing as a commercial activity. Beyond providing food for local communities, fishing also became a commercial activity. Fishermen sold their catch in town markets, and fish was a crucial commodity, especially at major fairs and religious events when meat was forbidden. Fishing during fasting periods and religious rules. During certain times of the year, such as religious feasts and Lent, the Church prohibited the consumption of meat. Fish became a vital alternative in the medieval diet during these fasting periods, leading to a significant increase in fishing activity. The life of a medieval fisherman. Conditions and challenges. The life of a medieval fisherman was not easy. They faced harsh weather conditions, navigated turbulent waters, and constantly maintained their fishing nets. Additionally, fishing was labor-intensive, and most fishermen were humble workers with limited resources. Fishing in coastal communities, in coastal villages, fishing was the main economic activity. Not only the fishermen, but entire communities depended on fishing to survive. Freshly caught fish quickly became a staple on the tables of families living in these areas. The importance of fishing for the medieval economy. Fishing also played a significant role in the medieval economy. As maritime trade expanded, fish was exported to various regions, including distant cities and countries. Fishing communities flourished around ports and coastal towns. Fishing and the development of port cities. The development of port cities was heavily influenced by fishing. Major commercial centers emerged around ports where fish was traded, not only as food, but also as a valuable commodity. Coastal cities became prosperous, with many evolving into international trade hubs. Fishing in the Middle Ages, with all its difficulties and its importance for food and commerce, was an essential part of daily life. Often overlooked, fishermen played a vital role in the medieval economy, ensuring that communities had enough to eat. What do you think about this ancient profession? Leave your comment below. We've reached the end of another journey through the Middle Ages, but the mysteries and curiosities of this period continue to fascinate us. Which of these topics caught your attention the most? Don't forget to leave your comment, like, and share this video with your friends. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now to follow our next adventures through time. A big hug, and see you in the next video.